Okay. Welcome everyone to today's webinar hosted by the Indian Business and Professional Women. It's hard to believe this is an organization that dates back to 1994, which I remember well. The organization was founded to mentor women to achieve their professional aspirations, and a lot of women have been helped by this organization. And then for the past 16 years, IBPW has also hosted these book discussions in partnership with Silicon Valley Reads and the Santa Clara Public Library Foundation. So today's events, like all of them, are really designed to enhance the focus on literacy and reading, get people more exposed to good literature. I know in my own experience, people know I'm kind of a bookaholic, and so I'm always being asked, what do you think is a good book to read? Many people want to read, but for lots of reasons, they don't know exactly what would really be good and interesting. And I think that's where Silicon Valley Read steps in. And then there's the building of community around discussing the same book, or in this case, the same books. So before we're going to introduce the book we are discussing today, one more note. A link has been sent out to many of you previewing the upcoming Gurdwara tour. It's sponsored also by IBPW. It's this Wednesday, March 16th, 1:30 at the Sikh Gurdwara of San Jose, 3636 Gurdwara Avenue. I'm certain you're taking all this down, but go online to siliconvalleyreads.org and you will see it under events if you want to register. Okay, so now on with the show. Today's book is Valerie Kaur, See No Stranger. Fabulous. You know, I always think of Obama every time I see this type of cover from the posters during that election. It's really fascinating to me because it truly is a part memoir, which many people like to read, and it's partially a book that is really about social justice and a true practical guide for changing the world. And so this combination makes it really unique. It makes it wise. It's beautifully written. It's a pleasure to read, and it's very thought-provoking. You know, we always have that thing about, is your cup half full or half empty? We look at the world today and we say, how can one book about changing the world change anything? Because look what is happening in our world, Ukraine and Russia, what's happening here, you know, any place. And I would argue that if one book changes one person, you are changing the world, because you never know what the butterfly effect will be as the sort of circles start broadening. So we're going to hear from our panelists, who I'll introduce in a second. But in my reading, I thought about, why was this book so important? I can only speak for myself, because I see it really as an antidote to the hate and the anger. And there have been many things that the author has had to overcome in this book. And yet she's writing about an actual way to do that and to move from hate and anger to something she calls revolutionary love, which is loving others, loving our opponents, loving ourselves. Revolutionary love is medicine for our times. It just might be our best chance for our collective future. She goes on to say, love is a labor, a conscious embodied practice. Love as labor can be taught, modeled, and practiced. Revolutionary love is the choice to labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves in order to transform the world around us. So it's a really, really big, important subject. So our panel today, including myself as the moderator, what I think is really interesting is the diverse backgrounds and experiences we all bring to it. And I really related to this book. I'm Jewish, and as part of the ceremonial meal, the Seder, for our most important holiday, Passover, there's a time when the ceremony is stopped. We walk over and we open the door for this imaginary figure, Elijah. And Elijah represents the person who could one day arrive as an unknown guest. Some people believe, as an unknown guest, Elijah is the Messiah. But even if you don't believe in the Messiah, we were sort of taught every person that you meet could be Elijah. So if you can connect with and be kind with every person, because you never really know. So this tradition, all of us on the panel have, you know, different ways of thinking about what this means. I was an emeritus professor of management at San Jose State, where I taught for 25 years. I began a consulting firm with my partner, John Baird, which is now 25 years old. I can't believe it, but our panelists are really amazing. So let me give a brief description of each, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start. Jessi, raise your hand so people know that it's you. There you go. Thank you. Jessi is an author, an international speaker. She's even been a TEDx speaker as well. She's written several children's books, delivered workshops and retreats. She has been an essential scholar of Sikh scripture and tradition. Jessi believes that peace is actually possible if we realize the power and beauty of oneness that underlies diversity and understands our interconnectedness. Our second speaker is Margaret Abe-Koga. Do you want to raise your hand? Great. In her fourth term on the Mountain View City Council and the first Asian American woman to serve, she was mayor through some really difficult times in 2009. We can all remember how we loved the Great Recession. And then that wasn't enough. Then you were still at the helm in 2020 during the initial nightmare with COVID. So it's very impressive, your guidance. Margaret is Harvard educated. She's used her experience in education to champion many initiatives around sustainability, affordable housing, diversity, and I could go on and on. Our third speaker is Reshma Inamdar. Reshma, you want to raise your hand? Great. And she describes herself as having, I love this, as having been conceived in France, but actually born in India, raised in the US, and with the opportunity to live in multiple places around the world, which brings her current perspective to this. Reshma is actively engaged in the community. She serves on the Leadership Council of the Tri-City Interfaith Coalition, also the League of Women Voters, and more recently, Rotary as well. Reshma also believes that irrespective of nationality or creed, we are connected through our common humanity. So on that note, Jessi, do you want to start? And you can all talk about what really resonated with you in the book, what you particularly liked, any concerns you had about it. And we will save our questions until the end. And because of the format, I would ask you in the audience to put your questions whenever you have them in the chat function. And when it's time to start addressing them, I'll call them out.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michelle. There's a lot in this book and there's a lot to talk about. There's so many diverse subjects that she touches upon so beautifully, but I'm going to restrict myself to one aspect of it and touch upon another one very briefly. The thing that resonated most with me was her upbringing as a Sikh child, a Sikh woman. Now, like Valerie, I'm a Kaur, I'm a Sikh, I'm an immigrant woman, I'm brown-skinned. So there's a lot of commonality right there. I want to begin with See No Stranger, the title of the book. So See No Stranger comes from a line in the Sikh scripture that says, there is none other, there is no enemy. Because we are all interconnected through the oneness in which the Creator created us. We carry the same light, we're made from the same clay, and we go back to the same source. So there is an inherent oneness in the very fashion in which we were created. It's just that we've forgotten that. We focus so much on our differences that we have forgotten the commonality. So See No Stranger is the very core of the Sikh tradition. And it's such a beautiful title for this book because our orientation to see ourselves in duality and to constantly live in that duality of you and me, them and us, day and night, dark and light, all of those things. I mean, we are living in the duality. So to move from duality to oneness is a journey. And that journey is made only by love, radical love, revolutionary love, becoming aware of our interconnectedness again. So this love in Sikhi was shown in the battlefield, which is very interesting because we are constantly in a battlefield, whether that is the battlefield that is of the mind or the battlefield that we have created our world. So see no stranger, to practice that in the battlefield where you are opposing a tyrannical regime that is out to that, where your existence becomes questionable, where it's an existential threat. That is huge. And in many ways, that battlefield has entered our everyday lives today. I mean, we are at war right now, and it's just heartbreaking, gut-wrenching to see what is happening in Ukraine. So the basis of Valerie Kaur's activism, her inspiration, her drive, her striving is her faith. And when I think of that, I feel that people of faith, for them, it is very important to have that inspiration remain alive and to be able to practice that fearlessly. Whether it is wearing the yarmulke or the turban or the patka or the hijab, I mean, these are superficial outer appearances differences, but the inherent oneness, the same blood running through us, the same light, the same clay as I referred to, if we can but remember that, and to remove the barriers of superficial differences is what is important. And that's what Valerie is striving for. She's bringing down the barriers, she's bringing down the obstacles. So many of us see people of faith, especially, and people that are not part of the mainstream. We remember the pre-9/11 and the post-9/11 existence. I had written a book called Dear to Kuya in 2008. I had written that because my son wore a patka, which is a headscarf that young Sikh boys do. And he was pretty much the only kid in his class from K to 12. And as a mom, I would go and talk about why he looks different and why he's really the same, why he's as American as anybody else. And then I wrote this book so that how many Jessis are out there and how many are needed to go to these different schools. And I wanted this to be available to every Sikh mom. And then come 9/11, we started this organization called Kaur Foundation. It was a proactive effort to put education from K to 12 that focused on, that included Sikh studies as a curriculum. You know, when my son was in middle school, I saw 3 lines that described who a Sikh is, literally 3 lines, and we wanted to change that. So we created content and we've created case studies, and Kaur Foundation's content is in public schools, in many, many schools, and the effort continues. We're educating the educators, we are training them, we're providing them material so that they can disseminate it in their classrooms. What this is doing is, it is attacking ignorance. It is raising awareness. If awareness is raised and ignorance is obliterated, then the differences will not become fearful. I think fear is at the heart of violence, whether it is emotional or it's physical or it's isolation or whatever it is fear that dominates that cycle and of oppression and violence. And that's what we're trying to attack and erase. I remember a few days after, there was all these killings and this fear that struck in our community after 9/11. My husband was attacked when he went to pick up something from 7-Eleven. I feel there is that muscle memory remains. We are still afraid after all these years to go to 7-Eleven after dark. That should not happen. My son's principal had to hold an entire assembly to make sure that children of different faith traditions, whether they are Jewish or Muslim or Sikh or Hindus, are not attacked by anyone, are that it's the same thing that happens as it happens every day. He had to pretty much be in the classroom. Now, how many principals actually did that? So what I'm saying is that what Valerie Kaur has done, her inspiration has come from her faith, and there are many who are inspired like this. Now, she also touches upon reimagining institutions. That is very important. That is very complex. That is an area where a lot more discussion, a lot more reflection, a lot more in-depth study needs to be done. Violence cannot happen without accountability. I'm just going to tell you a little story, and I think my time will be up by then. I was at CVS a few days ago, and I picked up a moisturizer, and I looked at the price, and it said $22. And I knew the manager, and I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, Luke, how come this is so expensive?" And he says, "Jessi, if you don't like the price, just walk out with it. I won't be able to stop you." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "People come with baskets and load up whatever they want, and they leave. I cannot call the cops. The cops can't do anything, and I cannot do anything. That is why the price of everything is rising." So this is a real life story. And we've seen pictures of Louis Vuitton store being attacked and looted. And people saying that this is need based. Seriously, I need a Louis Vuitton bag. So we need to reimagine our institutions like law enforcement. We need to address mental health issues, but we also need to make sure that law and order prevails, that violence does not go without repercussion. And so she's written a complex book. She has challenged us. She has challenged us to think and rethink. I'm going to end with two quotations that deeply touched my heart. There are many. One of them that is at the core of this is, when it gets hard to love harder. She quotes Van Jones on it. And what is the key to loving harder? It is labor in love, which is to listen to somebody else. And by through listening comes understanding. And that is the core of finding the commonality. And the second one is, our lives are long and our circles are small. If we could all strive to widen those circles, as Valerie has done in this book. She has come up against huge obstacles, but she has cut through them. She has struggled through them, whether they are personal, whether they are physical. The book is raw, it's naked, it's painful, it's cheerful, it's exuberant. It's all of these things. And it took a lot of courage for her to write it. And I loved it. I enjoyed reading it. And I think my time is up. And thank you for this opportunity to share my perspective on it.
Thank you so much, Jessi. I think just that final thought about the courage and how this shows up in different ways is so important. So Margaret, let's build on this. And what is your perspective? What did you get from reading this amazing, complicated book?
Well, thank you, Michelle, and thank you to the organizers, Silicon Valley Reads, for this opportunity. I really appreciate the chance to dialogue with all of you, and I'm really grateful. I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of time to read books. I read agenda packets. So this, made me read this book, which is I found it's very timely in so many levels, and really gave me some time to reflect on what's been going on in the world the last several years. And I was thinking, well, as an Asian American, Japanese American woman, like how do I relate to this book? And what I really appreciated about the author was her ability to see, beyond differences, right? But looking for the commonalities. And I found just like personally a lot of parallels with the author. I'm a daughter of immigrants. My parents are Japanese immigrants. The experiences of growing up a child of color, experiencing discrimination. My parents didn't speak English. I was their translator, so I saw through their eyes discrimination and injustice, and just how tough it is to be a person of color in this country, despite the fact that my parents immigrated here because they were seeking a better opportunity. They were children who grew up during the World War II, post-war Japan. And then, I remember them telling me that they decided to immigrate here. My mother was pregnant at the time they visited the country, and then she had me while they were here. And one of their biggest reasons for making the decision was because they felt that I as a female, would have a better opportunity in the United States. So I guess it's, left a very big impression on me, my identity as a female, and then as a person of color. And so I really appreciated her, the commonalities that I personally felt with her. And then, being Japanese American, and her references to internment. Although my parents didn't go through it, I do have family members who went through internment, and just seeing the over time, over the American history, the repetition of the similar incidents, similar situations that have gone on throughout our history, and the need, and I think we're going through that, the reckoning, the need to acknowledge that, recognize it, and acknowledge it, for us to be able to move on. But I was thinking about, how this book relates to my world in politics, the political world that I'm engaged in. And as Michele mentioned, I've been on the city council for 14 years. I've had a chance to be mayor twice, both during two major crises, I'd say, in the last 15 years. And oftentimes folks ask me, well, what were their differences from the Great Recession to COVID? And I think it's not necessarily the incidences, but I will say the COVID was much more challenging in many ways, but probably the most prominent was I've sensed the polarization of this nation. I think it's just, and maybe now perhaps the world. And this idea of, and this is what the author talks about, us versus them, is much more prominent now. And that has made our job more challenging. My first job was working for Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, and I remember, she'd talk a lot about it back in the 1990s and even the early 2000s in Congress. Even though you had two sides of the aisle, there was a lot more of reaching across the aisle to get work done. And I actually think my former boss was really quite a expert at doing that.
Mhm.
And so I learned from watching her, and that's always been my philosophy is, let's, as the author talks about, listening to stories, listening to people's backgrounds to really get a sense of, where they're coming from, try to find those commonalities. There'll always be differences, but even being able to, I'd say agree to disagree. But that has become harder and harder to do. I feel this world has become more binary, right? It's yes or no, black or white. When in reality, I believe we live in a very gray world. And so I appreciate, that the author, with her, really kind of bringing it back and reminding us, I think, of, the importance of being able to listen, to share those stories, to have that wonder, I think the sense of wonder she talks about, so that we can, get to that point of commonality, of common interests. And at the end of the day, I think that's how we move forward, especially with public policy, what we do. There's never, as taught, there's never a right or wrong or right answer. It's the best answer. And we get to that by being able to have that complete dialogue, with all different perspectives in mind. And I find that not very common anymore. Folks seem to be kind of stuck in their own mindset and an unwillingness to listen to the other side. And actually this morning, I just had a conversation with a police chief about this, and how, with police reform and so forth. And I've seen it too, frankly. We've been dealing with some of these police issues, and instead of trying to listen to both sides, it's been this, if you don't agree with me, or I don't perceive you to agree with me, I'm not going to talk to you. And that's unfortunate, because I think, the walls come up and we get stuck. And we really have to be, willing to be open-minded and accept folks and their perspectives, their background, to get to some kind of resolution. The other thing I really appreciated was the discussion on self-care. I think we especially when we're busy trying to change the world, we forget to do that. And as a breast cancer survivor, going into my 6th year, that was something that really kind of hit home to me, that you really have to, take care of yourself and your health, be there for yourself in order to be able to be there for other people. So, and I think, especially amongst all of us who are active, being busy in the community and doing different things, we tend to forget that. And then I would end with just what's been very recent to me is the issue of being a female and being a person of color. And sometimes, there's which one is harder, I guess you could say. We had this incident recently where one of my API community elected officials, made some derogatory comments about a female management executive. And I was asked to, join in unison with my Latina sisters to speak out against this gentleman. And I did. And yet I was admonished, frankly, yesterday by an API male, former elected official. And so the challenges of being female is very, very real to me. We're still trying to figure out how to deal with that. What do we do? How do we confront this? How do we have this conversation within our API community about gender and bias there? But and I think, we get the double edge, right? We have the 2 barriers, we're Asian and female. It's twice as hard. But I have to remind myself, and this book is helpful to kind of remind myself that we can't let that get us down. We just have to keep going. So I definitely appreciate this opportunity, and thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Margaret. You've brought up so many interesting things from your family background and the conversation about, what's the word now, intersectionality. It just makes everything more complex. I was thinking about that old saying when you were talking, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but will it make you kinder? Because the point, as I'm seeing it, of the revolutionary love is that you love the opponent. And that's that next level, that almost aspirational level of being a good human that we're striving to. But not everybody is striving. Not everybody's striving at the same pace. So love to go on and continue to hear more thoughts. Reshma, what did you get from the book, and what would you like to talk with us about?
Well, I have really dog-eared this book more than most other books I read. There's just so much wisdom and information and insight and experience that it's difficult for me to pick one particular thing, but I'll talk about a few that genuinely, especially resonated with me. First of all, well, I'd like to thank Silicon Valley Reads for holding this program and for Deepika for inviting me to participate. I really enjoyed listening to all of you folks, and gaining your insight into this. I think it's a remarkable book. It's truly courageous. That word, I think, best describes it. It's also forthright, and it's honest. It's insightful. I mean, I could go on and on and on about it. What I especially appreciated was her willingness to talk about not just fighting injustice and bigotry and outside, but also addressing her own human frailties. Her memoir is definitely not a Pollyannish kind of book, where everything just works out hunky-dory. There's many situations where, despite all the hard work and sincere effort, they didn't get the desired outcome. But even in those situations, she felt she had learned something, and it was a process moving towards something, towards a better outcome. You folks have already talked about her importance for creating one humanity and learning to be a kinder person, and also all the different things that she experienced as being a woman of color here. I personally also appreciated her translating Sikhism to us, and also talking about the Sikh community, because I do know Sikh people. I've met them. They're good community friends, but I had not been very aware of all the some of the inner philosophy of the Sikh religion. So I really appreciated getting that opportunity to learn more about that, and learning it in a way where it wasn't just you're reading a textbook, but it's a lived experience of someone. I genuinely love that. And I love the way she interwove these, the Sikh basic tenet of the one creator and one humanity through her narrative and through all of her experiences. I also appreciated how she humanized the post 9/11 hate crimes that happened. I was just really, it really touched my heart to read about Balbir Singh Sodhi and his brother, and also the other, victims of hate crimes that happened afterwards. Because they were basically innocent people. They weren't the one who perpetrated 9/11, and yet their lives were taken as well. And I think it's important to have read that in that kind of detail to understand what actually happened, right? And to see the impact of that kind of loss on not just the person, but the family and the community as a whole. And, especially when she talked about the Sikh temple massacre in Oak Creek, that was just, I really had just tears running down my eyes when I read that. And it's not something that you get when you read a newspaper article, right? Or even a flash on a news story. You really don't get that, who really suffered? How did this community process and work through this pain? And what was the outcome of it? And in this particular case, the outcome eventually was that hate crimes against Sikhs were eventually added to the list of possible hate crimes. So, that was the one good thing that came out of it, I guess. And the other one was that the community there got to know the Sikh people in a way that you know, they probably wouldn't have bothered to do it, quite frankly. So that's sort of the message I get from her, you know, which is that in every, you know, in every horrible and horrifying situation, work through it and find that opportunity to change the world, to change yourself, to change one other person, so that you make the world a little bit better after seeing something so devastating. I'm just looking at my notes here. What also resonated with me, quite frankly, was her desire and ability and her willingness to talk to people who she did not agree with, or who did not agree with her, or who actually had wanted to harm her or harm people, you know, who loved her. And I thought that was courageous. And I saw the real inner struggle when she talked about that. I resonate with that because I've often tried to do the same, you know, but I haven't had a whole lot of luck, honestly. Yeah, as a Muslim American, I've had to have many conversations about, you know, Muslims and being Muslim in America, about Islamophobia. And I think when I have had one-on-one conversations, it's been much more fruitful, you know, in terms of being able to share and, you know, overcome fear, overcome lack of knowledge, perhaps, you know, those kinds of things. But at the same time, it's also been really difficult. And through reading her book, I kind of was able to understand where some of my own roadblocks were. And one of those was that, you know, you really need to have both people being willing to have that discussion. Now, she talks about several incidences, for example, in the Mexican restaurant, where she saw the white supremacists making these racial epithets against, you know, sand, etc. And yeah, I won't, you know, repeat the words, but they were shocking and horrifying. And she, you know, went forward to have a conversation with that. It didn't quite end the way she had wanted, but I think it kind of built for her a step towards the next conversation. What I saw was two things. One is the other person has also to be willing to have an honest conversation, to be willing to listen. And the most important one is accountability. You know, whether it's yourself or whether it's someone else, the ability for someone to say, yes, I am accountable, I did that. Even if they can't even make it to I am sorry, just that step to say, you know, I might have hurt you, is actually the biggest step in breaking down barriers. And you know, you cross that divide where you say, you know what, this person also sees me as a human being. And that was some of the, you know, some of the biggest lessons I took away from this book is, okay. And, you know, and I saw that especially when she talked about her cousin and the sexual assault that she, you know, had to confront him with, and how that process went out. But anyway, there's just, I really loved the book. It talked about the gamut of emotions, and she didn't try to shame you, you know, through a particular emotion, right? I mean, rage was okay, you know, being just being sad was okay. It was okay to grieve, and that all of that is part of the process of getting to that, you know, revolutionary love. I mean, I could just go on and on and on, but I'm just going to end with this particular quote. Love is a form of sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, and life-giving, a choice we make over and over again. Love can be taught, modeled, and practiced. It engages all our emotions. Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. Anger protects that which is loved. And when we think we have reached our limit, wonder is the act that returns us to love. So revolutionary love is a choice to labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves in order to transform the world around us. It begins with wonder. You're part of me I do not yet know. Thank you.
Thank you. So audience, isn't this an amazing panel and quite an interesting topic? And we can start in any way you wish. I'm not seeing any questions on the chat. So I'd like to kind of, oh, here comes one. And otherwise, I'm sure all of us can come up with something. How do you think we can personally help forgive our opponents, especially with all the divisiveness happening in the world? It's really a question about forgiveness, which is so foundational. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
No.
Reshma, please.
I think we have to understand what forgiveness means, probably to ourselves. It isn't just feel good thing where you can just hide it under the rug, so to speak, right? That's kind of what happens, for example, with sexual assault, often the case with women. It has to be, I think forgiveness in some ways has to be a two-way street, but ultimately it's also compassion for yourself. If it can't be a two-way street where the other person's never going to forgive, they're just never going to, there's no accountability, forget that. It's having compassion for yourself. And I think in going forward with that and saying, okay, well, this is where I'm going to be at with this person or institution.
Go ahead, Jessi. Thank you.
It's a process, forgiveness, and it doesn't happen right away. And you have to go through first accepting that a wrong was committed. Mm-hmm. And to forgive really is to liberate yourself mm-hmm. from that burden. And again, it happens over a period of time. You don't forget. The hurt doesn't go away. The pain beneath the wounds that seem to have healed is still alive. The muscle memory is intact. But in spite of all this, you are letting go of that desire to get even mm-hmm. because you do it for yourself, to liberate yourself from that burden. To me, that's all there is to it. And it's tough.
Margaret.
Add to that, I just actually landed on the page that has the quote, "Forgiveness is not forgetting, forgiveness is freedom from hate." And just as the other two members mentioned, I think it's that. I think, right, it's just as taxing to the individual, to yourself, as it is to the other person. And it is to be able to forgive, is to be able to break through that barrier to move on, I think. And not, be stuck in stalemate. But I actually do, I always have said, like in politics too, to quite a few folks, and just my own experiences, that you can forgive, but you don't have to forget, is what I say, because I don't think forgetting is necessarily productive. You learn from the experience, from your mistakes, and so you don't necessarily want to forget that, I would say, but just learn and transform from that. But then the forgiveness is, yes, that emotional piece, I think, that can allow you to move forward. So that's how I would look at.
I'd add a question in here that I think was relevant generally and speaks to what we're just talking about with forgiveness. And that is, and you brought it up, Jessi, originally, is fear. And if I were in charge of designing human beings, or many animals for that matter, I would completely eliminate the whole fear thing, because fear so often changes to another secondary emotion, which is hate and mm-hmm. anger. And it's very easy to be fearful of something that we consider strange. And so a question, something we can discuss is what are the kinds of forums that we can have, institutional, big, large, medium, or small, that get people who are very different together, because more and more we live in the sort of the zip code world, or my career is with people going to college and very high level executives and people more like myself. And I have less and less opportunity to meet people who are different unless I really seek it out. And so here's an example of, I think, where fear plays at an incredibly visceral level. So we moved down to Coronado a couple of years ago. And it was, during the election season and campaigning, and 2 blocks away is the Bay, and I could hear all of this noise. And so I start walking out there on like a Saturday afternoon, and people that know Southern California, there's a bay in between San Diego and Coronado, and it's quite large. And there was a Trump boat rally. And literally, I don't know if you ever felt this as a mom, when your kid is going up to sing, or, is in a sports competition or something, as a mom, your heart all of a sudden is no longer beating inside your chest. It's beating, what, about a foot out there? And I could not believe it as I'm watching these hundreds of boats, and then there were hundreds of people on shore chanting and shouting. And I felt this tremendous fear. And I was trying to analyze, what is the fear about? I wasn't afraid that something bad was going to happen to me at that moment. It was just this overriding emotional, visceral response of fear. These people are my strangers. How could I love these people? How could they love me? We're all so caught up in our identity that a lot of fear in the world right now is that our identity is being attacked. And when our identity is being attacked, does that mean there's no place for us? So how can we have forums where people meet each other, or you have in certain kinds of borders of different countries where there's intermarriage, something that is going to make the stranger not strange? Jessi.
There is no better place to address it than the classroom. The brass tacks, ground zero, where we learn, where we absorb, where all of our early, middle, and higher education happens. And that's why educating, bringing awareness at that level, that's how we cannot change people who are grown up whose mindsets are rigid. Children are pliable, children are innocent, children can be taught. And that's why it's very important to bring education and awareness through the classrooms. And that's why we directed, our work, Core Foundations, to the classroom. And we've seen a remarkable difference. Educators are reporting this to us. Not only are the kids who are different in whatever form feeling more confident, but the awareness of the differences and the commonality that runs underneath those differences.
Exactly.
That fear is changing into, oh, you're the same, or you're a regular kid. And I think it's very hard to change it after it's bred and it's set. It's easier to build when the ground is soft, the soil is ready, right? And that's why our education system has to focus on that, in my opinion.
I think we're probably all on the same page on that. What as a, Margaret, I almost want to put this question to you specifically because you're in government. So, parents are trying to have a much larger role, or as well as a different role in local education than they had previously, and are doing almost the opposite of what Jessi has said, is restricting what can be talked about, which restricts the opportunity to get to know different people, or to have the message that we are all the same. We can look different, we can act a little different. But so I don't know if you have any thoughts about how to respond to that, because certainly the educational place is where we want this message.
And it's as diverse as it gets.
No, I was thinking the same. It's in our schools and education that we can really make that change or difference. And to your comments, Michele, I guess I put a lot of hope into our young people. I see it, my girls are one's 18 and 20, and they're the Gen Z generation. And I'm very excited about this generation because one, I think, for all the good and bad of social media, the one thing that it has done, I think, has broken down borders. And, we are a much more global society. And it's kind of, my daughter just has an interest in K-pop, for instance, and and I've just been fascinated by the globalness of like the K-pop or these figures, and I see in them, there's much more acceptance and differences, or right, whether it's fluidity and gender or race, and so I guess I put a lot of hope in them. My one, fear is with the generation is the cancel culture. I think that is very strong. And again, that's where maybe with time and experience, I hope that, that will change and soften. But it is definitely a different world from when I was, a teen. And my hope is that will encourage that, common intersectionality and commonality.
Michele, what we're doing today is shutting up diverse opinions. We have to come back to listening. Doesn't matter if I disagree. If I agree with you, I don't learn anything. It's only when I hear people that I disagree with, that my mind opens. And we're shutting up disagreement.
Yeah.
And I think, Jessi, that's a very strong point that you made. Margaret, you're right. Social media has opened up borders, but at the same time, it's being weaponized to also divide, and very effectively so. I mean, there are, I don't know, millions of paid trolls out there to do exactly that, divide all of us. And Joy Barnett's in our chat had made some comments. Joy's our president from TCIC. She's also reading the book, and I appreciated her comments that she made about the fact that we are probably hardwired. We are hardwired most likely to as a means of survival, right? Fear was again, it's a useful tool that can go horribly wrong if it's not balanced with a prefrontal cortex, really, and I think maybe what's his name? Oh gosh. We have nothing to fear but fear itself, was Roosevelt, President Roosevelt. This happens when you grow older, the brain cells go. But at the same time, it's a useful tool, just like social media is a useful tool. And we have to, I think, learn how to use that better. And as part of the learning in classrooms, it would be great if, children are also taught, those skills on how to try to, break out of the propaganda machine.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. We don't put everything on social media, but I think a question is, in a way, every person in the world that has access to the internet is a publisher. That was restricted for hundreds and hundreds of years, because really only a certain percentage of the population could read or could scribe, and they were typically the highest religious officials and the people that worked directly for them. And then with the printing press and various things, literacy became more democratized. But publishing is very different than reading. And I don't mean in the sense that reading is passive, because it is, a lot is happening. But the fact that anybody can publish means that we have a flood of information and things that we didn't have before. And if we choose, we can become enormously fearful, because, as I say, hate is such a secondary emotion to fear around the loss of identity or our place in the world. And so we're getting almost like these sort of viral fears. It's not unlike COVID. It's an infection, which is why they call it going viral. And so, what can be done one could argue that the government should play the role, but it's also how do we legislate in a way where we're not completely censoring, but that we have sort of some commonly agreed upon ground rules that we can use. And again, I would go back to Jessi's comments on education is, you know, the internet is such a strong part of everybody, especially the Gen Z. You don't do anything without it. The first thing you do in the morning is go check something on your phone. And so, you know, there are many different forums where we could learn, you know, in more explicit ways. Here are some maybe do's and don'ts or things that are going to be better than what we're doing now. So I don't know what other tools or forums. I'm trying to get in our last few moments just a little bit practical on how everybody here can make the world better.
So Michelle, the example that comes to mind is her grandfather's resistance to her marrying someone who was not from the community. He loved her to death, but the resistance was fear. Fear that my daughter will lose her faith, fear that she will move away from the family, fear that he will not be good enough for her or that he's different. And that fear was transformed by love, by acceptance, you know, acceptance that he is good, that he is as good as my daughter. He said, I will celebrate for you. I may not agree with you, but I will celebrate for you. That to me was such a core, beautiful thing. We don't control our children. We don't control who they marry, who they love. But what we do control is our responses to what seems alien. And to accept that and to turn that into that love that she talks about. Really, I mean, love has become such an abused and overused word that one almost recoils from it. But that is the one feeling, the radical love that will change the world. Really, there is nothing else, that empathy, that wanting to listen, that compassion. And it was so beautiful for me that he came around and she didn't have to choose between her grandfather's love and her love for her fiance or, you know, the husband she married, the guy she married.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? I'm assuming people can see what's in the chat that went to everyone. Any other thoughts? Let me close and Reshma, you read a little bit of this, but seeing no stranger begins in wonder. It is to look upon the face of anyone and choose to say, you are a part of me I do not yet know.
Yeah.
Wonder is the wellspring for love. So if we could pull a little back on the fear and put a little more out there on wonder and curiosity, we might be able to change what's happening in the old prefrontal cortex. And I'll leave you with that. I don't think, the poet, is it Audre Lorde wrote it? It is not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences.
Right.
So celebrate away, folks, and get back to your Sunday afternoon. And thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to IBPW and to Silicon Valley Reads. It's just like an honor to be involved.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle and Reshma and Margaret. Pleasure to hear all of you.
It's an honor and a pleasure.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Definitely. Thank you. Really, really happy to meet all of you and to have this conversation. Thank you. Thank you. I guess we're